So, you just read Shadow Over Innsmouth, and you want to find out what the hell is actually going on here. So you go on YouTube and at some point you find my video. Well, I got you covered. In this video, you will get all the little and big disgusting details about the deeper layers of the story. Short disclaimer, this video is for people who have already read the story. I will not repeat the whole plot. For that, I have made a two-part video that goes through the whole story with some nice additions, with some comments, with some trivia on the side. There's links to that below. So of course what we're doing here, there will be spoilers. All the spoilers. I'm gonna start with a short review of the story and then we will hop right into the big part, the analysis. You can skip that part if you're here for your English homework, I guess. But first, I wanna thank you all so much for watching. This is a fairly new channel with, I must say, actually a really loyal fan base already. And every subscribe, every like really helps. So if you enjoyed the video, please leave a comment, give the old upvote, and of course, subscribe so that more people watch my videos, and that gives me an easier time to produce more videos like this one. So for the review part, I think that there are two questions that I would consider important. So the first question is it a good read? Is it good literature? And I have to say, I think for somebody who reads newer stuff, it's a bit slow sometimes. There's so much exposition in the big chunks of lore that are being dropped, but the way this is done gives such a good sense of creepiness of how this is actually happening. You never know what's real, what's not real. You're being left alone in the dark a lot because every source has its own color that they put into the story that they're telling. And again, you can't trust them. It can all just be hearsay. But the atmosphere is really great. I think also that the way it's written is really cool. I see. These guys from YouGoth really are fun.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Who is it?
introducing the chocolate starfish.
Hello, William, my darling. How can I help you?
What? The whole footage is missing? How can that be? How will they enjoy the video without my face?
Oh, I see. The videos are doing better when they do not see my face. Well, I guess we will just have a weird montage in the background. Yes. Yes, give her my regards. Goodbye. It's gonna be one of those ones. I think also that the way it's written is really great. You have the whole, he's trying to make the Innsmouth dialect a thing when old Zadok talks. And I think that's hilarious and it's actually really cool to read. It of course might you throw off all the bad words that he's dropping. If you can't get over that, and you don't have to, but if you can, then I think that is not an issue at all. And we're going to talk about exactly that a lot later. It also has the first time that Lovecraft gives us an action sequence. Before, the horror was very slow. It's still very creepy and slow in this one, but there is this action sequence where he has to escape Innsmouth, where he escapes the hotel. And I think that that is a really great one. It's one if you would make a movie, which would be really cool to make. I think it is also a good starting point for Lovecraft, because the horror is tangent. There is a lot of cosmic horror in it, but there's also a lot of just body horror in it. There is creatures that are creepy. There's the sense of being followed and hunted the whole time. So if you're new to Lovecraft, this is a good story to start with, in my opinion. So yes, it is a good read. It is a bit old and dusty sometimes, but I enjoyed it. Then the other question is it creepy? What is the horror like? So I already answered some of the second question, and that is, does the horror hold up to newer stuff? And I think with this one, if you're somebody who's very imaginative, then definitely yes. There is so much stuff that if you start thinking about, it gets really gross and creepy and brutal. So for example, I was wondering about the whole Innsmouth society, because usually what you would expect is that the hybrids and the deep ones, when they take over Innsmouth, they would kind of form a new civilization. And you would think that that is a good civilization, but it is not at all. They still have this disgusting human hierarchy where there was the ones at the top and then there's the ones at the bottom, and you just use liquor to shut them up. You use them to breed your race if they want or not. The whole power structure in Innsmouth, and with the deep ones and between the deep ones and the hybrids and the humans, that is so bad. They don't take care of each other at all. It's not like with some fantasy races where it's like, yes, they're the bad guys, but actually they're like, between them, they take care of each other. They are a community. With Innsmouth, it's not that at all. It's just people being really bad. And that is, of course, the whole decay thing that's happening there as well. But there's things like that there's the things that your body is changing, the body horror. Because as you know, many of the citizens of Innsmouth transform into Deep One hybrids. And the way this is only described in small parts as an experience that happens to someone is really haunting me, because they are, for example, wearing these white robes. And then you think, okay, well, it's just to conceal it from everybody else. But honestly, Innsmouth gets no visitors. And everybody who's there who's not a deep one has to shut up, because otherwise, you know. So it is, I guess, mostly to hide it from themselves, because it's a horrible thing to happen to you. I guess it is the thing of that later you accept it, but while it's happening, it's super bad. Also keep this in mind for a future video which I'm gonna take, which is gonna include the thing on the doorstep, Shadow Over Innsmouth, and also the Shadow Out of Time. So if you take it very serious and you see all these people as beings that have that happen to them, there is a lot to uncover and a lot to think about that is horrible and that is implied. I think a lot of the horror here is implied. So if you enjoy that, it's really good. If you want your horror in your face, then it is still a good one, from Lovecraft especially, but it is not Saw. It's not that kind of thing where it's just everything's there to look at. This one has many layers. And then the third question is it rich? And that has, of course, the part of how is it written, and parts of that is already answered in the first question, but also in just the first two videos. But then again, for the deeper layers, how rich it actually is, how much is there in the story, we're gonna go right in the analysis. So before we get to the big analysis, the heart of this video, I want to reach out to you and ask you for your support. So of course you've probably already subscribed or considered subscribing. If you haven't and you're still watching, please subscribe. I'm such a shill. So before we get to the analysis, I want to show you our really cool new shirts and merch. So this channel works in the following way. So far, I haven't found anybody who supports the type of yapping I'm doing. So instead, we just have merch. Every video or every story I do, I have an artist that I collaborate with, and half of the profit goes to her. Usually it's a new artist with every video. So we have some really cool designs already. We have the Wendigo, the story by Algernon Blackwood, designed by Nadia. We have the Haunter of the Dark, designed by Fanny from Fan Stuff. And then, of course, for this video, I did a collaboration with Caro from Bnnyart. What you can see here is a really cool design. The design works with the story in every little detail. What you see at first glance is you have this protagonist, the adventurer, who's trying to escape Innsmouth, who's trying to get through this maze. He has the hat on. And then on the sides, there's these disheveled, disgusting buildings of Innsmouth. Some of them have still working chimneys where smoke is coming out. And then in the back, you can actually see the refinery in a pretty good state. And out of all this smoke, Old Marsh rises. And what you can see in his eyes is not just a really nasty fish eye, no, it also is Black Devil Reef. And there is a black and white version, but the coolest version, in my opinion, is the colored version. We have this nice marine blue, and then it's a gradient over not to white, but to this sandy beach color. It's a really cool design. I really like it. It's very minimalistic, as all of them are. The print is really good quality, and the shirts themselves feel really nice even after a couple of months. There's also a hoodie, there's special editions. So if you want to buy them, you can find it all on the links below. Just important to note for you, if you buy something, there is a shop for America, and then there's a shop for Europe. Unfortunately, those are the only options so far. The designs are the same, the shipping is just different, so wherever you live, pick the right store. Thank you all so much for supporting this channel, this really keeps me going. And now, back to the analysis. Now we get to the analysis part, which is the part where I ramble on and just talk about what I think about the story and what other people actually see in the story. So, where do we start off? I think we should start off where the story comes from. How did it come to be? The story draws heavily from several sources of inspiration. As we've already talked about in other videos, Lovecraft was a big fan of Arthur Machen, and the Dunwich Horror is also very much influenced by this author. Machen wrote several stories that are related to his mythos of the Little People that he created. The Little People are a fictional race of troglodyte humanoids who still inhabit the British Islands in secret underground caves. He wrote The Novel of the Black Sea in 1895, and Machen furthers the concept here with a hybridization between humans and the troglodyte race. It also plays a lot on this old folklore of changelings, you know, where evil spirits, they interchange a baby of an unsuspecting human couple with one of their own, a bit like a cuckoo. There are some other stories as well that influence this. H.G. Wells, for example, who wrote The Time Machine, I think, he wrote the story In the Abyss in 1986, where a sea creature that is very similar to the deep ones is described. Then there's also The Harbor Master by Robert W. Chambers, that deals with an ancient civilization of fishy humanoids at the bottom of the sea. There's also John Silence, Physician Extraordinaire by Algernon Blackwood from 1908. In this one, you have a whole city of people that are mutating. And Lovecraft was a really big Blackwood fan. He says that he's one of the best, if not even the best, horror author, maybe next to Poe. So this was also a big influence. You see, we're getting many stories that Lovecraft read and he loved, and authors that he liked and loved, that deal with similar topics. Then in 1913, Irvin S. Cobb published the story The Fish Head. I really don't like this one. Lovecraft back then even wrote a letter to the magazine that published the story where he praised it in such high tones. In this story, a half Native American woman and an African American man have a child together. And this child is terribly mutated. His skull sloped back so abruptly that he could hardly be said to have a forehead at all. His chin slanted off right into nothing. His eyes were small and round with shallow, glazed, pale yellow pupils, and they were set wide apart in his head, and they were unwinking and staring like a fish's eyes. Also, when Fishhead became a man grown, his likeness to a fish increased, for the hair upon his face grew out into two tightly kinked slender pendants that drooped down either side of the mouth like the beards of a fish. I'm really not sure if this story was that openly racist, or it was making fun of racism, because it's really intense like you just heard. Because Cobb was known to be a humorist, so this could be, you know, a South Parkian way of dealing with the people who are actually thinking like this. Yeah, it could be both, this story. Yeah. So, short interception here from Future Orlando. Apparently, this is actually a clear-cut case. This dude was super exceptionally racist, and that there is nothing else to find in this story other than his unbridled hatred towards non-white people. Fuck this guy. Back to the video. It really made me uncomfortable, that quote. I bet you're uncomfortable, but this gets way worse down the analysis part. Just wait. Talking about the town itself, Innsmouth is probably very much based on Newburyport. And there's also some memories from New York that he put in there. More about that later. And then when we go in the other direction, the legacy of the story, just recent stuff. Berenger is working on an illustrated book that just came out or is about to come out. Like, he's shown us a preview already on Instagram, but I'm not sure if it's out already. At least it's not out already in German and English. Tanabe has done the same thing. A cool, real cool manga. Honestly, it's everywhere. You know, it's the main influence for the game The Sinking City 1 and 2. The second one is coming out next year. There's also the PC game called Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth, which is a lot of the story from Shadow Over Innsmouth. It's the Call of Cthulhu other game that came out for a computer. It's in The Simpsons, and apparently it was even inserted in the background into the whole Game of Thrones universe. You know, you never see them, but apparently when you analyze Game of Thrones, there are deep ones in the back, pulling strings. There are actually some deep dives about this on YouTube. Go watch them. And then, of course, you know, you have the whole fishing hamlet in the very Lovecraftian fan favorite Bloodborne. There's so much more. There's a movie called Dagon. It's everywhere. It was very influential, I think you can get this. Now, how did Lovecraft write this story? Because Shadow Over Innsmouth was written over a long period of time, actually. He apparently rewrote it at least 3 times. There are even leftovers of an earlier draft that were saved from destruction. This is where he tells us the name of the main character, Robert Olmsted, among other things. At the end, with the final version, which is the one that we worked with, he was still unhappy. He even stated, "I don't think the experimenting came to very much. The result, 68 pages long, has all the defects I deplore, especially in point of style, where hackneyed phrases and rhythms have crept in despite all precautions. No, I don't intend to offer The Shadow Over Innsmouth for publication, for it would stand no chance of acceptance." At the end, it was even published as a standalone book, because people actually liked it. It would be the only story of Lovecraft that would come out, that would be published as a standalone book in his lifetime. Shadow Over Innsmouth is also the first story of Lovecraft that contains an action sequence, something that he had never done before, but which was very popular with the magazines that he was writing for. I really like how so much of Lovecraft's horror isn't jump scares or action sequences, but it's just putting the horrifying phenomenon and situation out there in the open, and you just kind of have to live with it. It's a bit like that new wave of really good horror movies that has been coming out in the last 10-15 years. I guess 10-15 years. You know, The Witch, Hereditary, The Lighthouse, those movies that don't rely on cheap theatrics at all. They just show you the horror. You know, there you have it. Look at it. Now be scared for 2 weeks. I swear to God, back when I watched The Witch for the first time, I literally could not sleep for 2 days. I was almost 30 when that happened. The horror, it just crawled inside of me and I didn't know how to cope. Finally, I promised you information about the Oaths of Dagon, because I'm not really sure where to put this, so I'm putting it here. The cult of Dagon has 3 oaths. First of all, there's a proviso, or like a preamble to all oaths. "Ja, Dagon, I submit to the authority of the esoteric order of Dagon. If I should betray these sacred oaths, I am theirs to try and to punish, according to the ancient laws and the extent of my transgression." Then there's the first oath. "Ja, Dagon, I swear that I shall keep faith with the deep ones in all things. I shall not resist their will, nor shall I betray their secrets." The second oath of Dagon. "Ja, Dagon, I swear that I shall serve the deep ones in all things, as they shall command me to the furthest extent of my ability." And then the final oath of Dagon that old Zadok never swore. "Ja, Dagon, ja, Hydra, take this child of Dagon and Hydra as my wife, to take into my home to beget and raise children, so that the race and the faith shall continue to prosper." These oaths are not taken directly from Lovecraft, but it is very much what is implied through the story. So if you want full benefit, you gotta bang a deep one. That's just how it is. That green card or blue card comes with a cost. Now we get to the actual cool, deep part that I like so much, which is the topics of the story and the ways of interpreting the story. Here's a little disclaimer that this part is on purpose incomplete. Because I think that a story that is easily interpreted and explained in 3 or 30 minutes lacks the depth that I seek so much in art. So I will kind of open up some broader areas, give you some background, and then let you go explore it from there. So there's some topics that I'm really not going to talk about. There's, for example, body horror, because there's so much body horror here going on. There's also finding your identity. Just like in other stories, there's so much interwovenness of identity and heritage. And then there's also how the horror kind of pulls you, how you kind of have to follow it. You don't want to, but you just kind of have to go there. But I guess it's time to finally talk about the big elephant in the room. I think it's funny that it's an elephant because of the party that represents the elephant. Racism and miscegenation. First of all, this is a super intense topic, but it is essential to the story, so we gotta do it. I'm gonna correct all the bad words that are in the direct quotes, but there are still some really nasty quotes and things you really don't want to hear that are going to be said. Just to put it out there. So for some people it might be painfully obvious to say, okay, this is about race and racism, but just saying, look, it is how it is, isn't it obvious how it is, just we all figured it out, right? This is kind of the attitude that made me fail a year in school. So I'm going to try to be thorough and explain it actually here. I'm going to start with some definitions because apparently people are absolutely not literate when it comes to media and any of these topics. Racism. Racism is a belief or system that considers certain races to be inherently superior or inferior to others, often leading to discrimination, prejudice, and systemic inequalities based on race. Miscegenation. The interbreeding or marriage between people of different racial backgrounds, historically viewed with prejudice by racist ideologies, especially in societies where racial segregation and discrimination were or are enforced. Both topics, but especially the second one, miscegenation, is something that you can find everywhere around the world. You know, oh, you're not allowed to marry a man from that village. You shouldn't go out with a whatever. So it is very universal. This is not just attacking white people. Although that is fun, but it's not just about that. You probably know Lovecraft has this one big stain on his resume. It is racism. It starts with his stories and letters, and then it ends with memes about the name of his cat, which he actually did name himself. The name was already given to the cat when he got the cat as a gift, so you already know in which circles he grew up and how this probably all developed. He marginally softened up at the end of his life, but he never really renounced or changed his views about this topic. It's also important to note that Lovecraft wrote The Shadow Over Innsmouth after he lived in New York for a couple of years. And it would turn out that he hates the town for many reasons, but also because New York back at that time, 1920s to 1930s, was already such a melting pot of races. It's the immigrants that come from all over the world via ships to the States, and they corrupt everything they touch, in his mind, of course. Now you take that, and then Deep Ones. That is basically the story. Lovecraft lived together with his wife Sonia Green in the Brooklyn district of Red Hook. That would prompt him to write a story called Horror at Red Hook. And here he describes the district in the following way. Buckle up. A hopeless tangle and enigma. Syrian, Spanish, Italian, and African American elements impinging upon one another. It is a babel of sound and filth, and sends out strange cries to answer the lapping of oily waves at its grimy piers and the monstrous organ litanies of the harbor whistles. Yeah. So how does Lovecraft express all of this in Shadow Over Innsmouth? You know, what is the art? Where is it in the art? Let's start off with a less intense, indirect way where he expresses this, which I think is actually really interesting, and disregarding what it's about is a neat way to put it in. And this is concerning the environment that the story takes place, you know, the town itself, the buildings. Here's the quote when he rides through Innsmouth for the first time and looks at the buildings. The structure, once white paint, was now grey and peeling, and the black and gold sign on the pediment was so faded that I could only with difficulty make out the words, Esoteric Order of Dagon. So just like the population, you know, you have, as a metaphor, the church that goes from being white on the outside to be, you know, darker and besmirched, and it's also falling apart. It's literally about how the good white is not there anymore, you know, how it's being replaced by this disgusting grey. And all this besmirching and filth is not just gross, it is one side of a falling apart, of a degeneration of society. And then on the other hand, it can also be interpreted as corruption of, in his case, New York or America or the Anglo-Saxon heritage through people who are not that and their seed. Now let's go to the more direct examples of racism, miscegenation, the whole stuff. Lovecraft emphasizes inhuman characteristics when describing the Innsmouth residents. I think you've noticed that. Some scholars, including myself, not a scholar, but some people also portray this as a form of otherness, you know, of differentiating and putting somebody who's also just damn human with just different shade of skin as somebody who's completely different. Here's the quote. There certainly is a strange kind of streak in the Innsmouth folks today. I don't know how to explain it, but it sorta makes you crawl. You'll notice a little in Sergeant if you take his bus. Some of them have queer, narrow heads with flat noses and bulgy, starey eyes that never seem to shut, and their skin ain't quite right. And the passage just goes on and on and on like that. It reflects fear of difference by using the physical appearance of the people And then it conveys this sense of alienation, of revulsion, of being disgusted. The concept of miscegenation is also really central to the story. It's represented here by the Innsmouth people that are interbreeding with the Deep Ones. Or, the islanders from Tahiti that are interbreeding with the Deep Ones. This is pretty easy to understand, right? It's a metaphor for Lovecraft's anxiety about racial mixing. The youth was certain that many specimens, even worse than the worst visible ones, were kept locked indoors in some places. People sometimes heard the queerest kind of sounds. The tottering waterfront hovels north of the river were reputedly connected by hidden tunnels, being thus a veritable warren of unseen abnormalities. What kind of foreign blood, if any, these beings had, it was impossible to tell. They sometimes kept certain especially repulsive characters out of sight when government agents and others from the outside world came to town. So here the foreign blood is stigmatized, and the townspeople's repulsive features, they're portrayed as a result of interracial mixing. Also notice how the word warren is not only just a maze of building, it comes literally from this underground burrow of rabbits and other animals. And this miscegenation then leads to impurity and degeneration. The story often describes the people of Innsmouth as degenerating due to their unholy union with the Deep Ones, which then again is just Lovecraft's fear of racial mixing leading to degeneration and cultural and maybe even biological decline. You've probably heard about the Salem man that came home with the Chinese wife, and maybe there's still a bunch of Fiji Islanders somewhere around Cape Cod. Well, there must be something like that back of the Innsmouth people. The place always was badly cut off from the rest of the country by marshes and creeks. This could also be a bit of inbreeding, for example, which is another topic. Also, the whole deal with the devil thing is another topic that, Obed doing a deal with the devil and then it comes back to haunt him. That is there. Let's hop in with another quote about this. His mother seems to have been some kind of foreigner. They say a South Sea Islander, so everybody raised Cain when he married an Ipswich girl 50 years ago. They always do that about Innsmouth people, and folks here and hereabouts always try to cover up any Innsmouth blood they have in them. This again references to the degeneration associated with mixing people's lineage, which you also have at the Islanders, where it's just the king's royal bloodline that isn't mixing. And this then leads to losing purity in the bloodline and in the population. Lovecraft often implies that the distinct look and the behavior of the Innsmouth people results from interbreeding with something other and more sinister. In real life, there will be people from a different ethnicity in New York, and here it's the Deep Ones. You see, Lovecraft often implies that the distinct look of the Innsmouth residents and their dark behavior is just a result from interbreeding with something other and sinister. So in real life, that would be the Americans, the Westerners, the Anglo-Saxons interbreeding with the immigrants that are coming to New York, and here it's the Innsmouth people that have interbred with the Deep Ones. Now, all this corruption is again very visible in another quote that, when I read it first, hit me really hard. When entering Innsmouth, Lovecraft describes some children on the side of the road in a way that you might probably have heard somewhere else. Once or twice I saw listless-looking people working in barren gardens or digging clams on the fishy-smelling beach below, and groups of dirty, simian-visaged children playing around weed-grown doorsteps. Somehow these people seemed more disquieting than the dismal buildings, for almost everyone had certain peculiarities of face and motions, which I instinctively disliked without being able to define or comprehend them. Simian-visaged means monkey-faced. I'm not gonna go further with this. If you don't get this one, please make better life choices. Yeah. The next one is actually hilarious. I really like this one, because I don't know about where you're from, but here in Austria we had horrible floodings this year, and apparently this happened in Spain, it happened in Poland, it happened in Czech Republic, it happened in Slovakia. It happened in many parts of Europe, and also it happened in America with Appalachia. And it happened, at least here, it happens mostly because conservatives have pulled apart the natural environment, and then they've destroyed the forest, they've destroyed the soil, everything that would be able to take the water in, and then there was rain, and then there were floods. It's the climate change, it's the environmental destruction, it's very much man-made what's happening here, because there's areas where it's not happening because they did the right things. But then, especially right-wing media is still really getting angry about those damn immigrants, although big parts of the country are literally drowning and the damages are in the billions. The real problem are the people that have a slightly different shade of skin color. Climate change is just a big psyop to keep you from finding out about lizard people, or in this case, fishmen. Now here's the quote that I want to talk about. Once in a while, I noticed dead stumps and crumbling foundation walls above the drifting sand, and recalled the old tradition quoted in one of the histories I had read, that this was once a fertile and thickly settled countryside. The change, it was said, came simultaneously with the Innsmouth epidemic of 1846, and was thought by simple folk to have a dark connection with hidden forces of evil. Actually, it was caused by the unwise cutting of woodlands near the shore, which robbed the soil of its best protection and opened the way for waves of wind-blown sand. So, very weirdly self-reflective. Also, you remember the Elder Sign stuff, right? That the other islanders, after killing off the tribe that's working with the Deep Ones, and also killing off the Deep Ones, they leave behind these Elder Signs as a ward or protection. And the Elder Sign is here described as a swastika. There are people who doubt all of this, what I'm gonna say, and it's not 100% proven, but there's enough historians who are also backing what I'm gonna say, so you can make up your own mind, but I think we should talk about it, right? The swastika, it is very famous for Hitler's rise to power in Germany, which happened at the time. And just to be clear, Lovecraft, when he wrote the story, didn't know, and he would never find out because he would die. He didn't know what Hitler was going to do, because just like now, nobody knows what those partiers are gonna do. It's not like they're always screaming it into our faces about their horrible plans, or that there are leaks telling us of their meetings that they're gonna do horrible genocidal things when they get to power. It's not like they tell us this, right? It's all out in the open. But back then, Lovecraft didn't really know what was gonna happen. But also, here's what Lovecraft said about one of the worst people to ever exist in one of his letters. The crazy thing is not what Adolf Hitler wants, but the way he sees it, starts out to get it. I know he's a clown, but by God, I like the boy. Yeah, so there's genocide, and then they leave behind a swastika. Speaking of right-wing bullshit, this whole story reads like a conspiracy fever dream, something that Alex Jones comes up with. Racial purity must be upheld because they are trying to take over. The Great Replacement, which is an actual very bad, very bad, I can say it, I can repeat myself. It's a very bad theory by certain populist right-wingers that basically says that, there's this secret elite of rich and powerful people, and they are trying to replace the white, native, good European or Western population by the not so good and not so white foreigners. And then society is undermined by these groups. And these groups here are framed as not only very different, but also dangerous. It becomes this whole us versus them situation. Fearmongers on the right really like to use this to, make you put all your hate and attention away from them, who are cutting your social services, who are cutting your education, who are cutting down on environmental programs, who are lowering the taxes for the rich. Hitler and his party did this very much. They were actually sponsored by rich industrialists who are now sponsoring those parties again. The real horror is how history repeats itself, I guess. And this narrative is here very present in Innsmouth, right? The immigrants, or the replacing population, are immigrants that are stealing your wife. They are weakening the bloodlines. They are taking over. Their final plan is replacement. It's terror. It's warfare on the whole human race. You can hear it, for example, in the following quote. For the present, they would rest, but someday, if they remembered, they would rise again for the tribute great Cthulhu craved. It would be a sitter greater than Innsmouth next time. They had planned to spread and had brought up that which would help them, but now they must wait once more. And now we come to what I think is the most interesting part, which is, marriage, relationship, all those things. Lovecraft was married for only a couple of years, from 1924 to 1926, to Sonia Green, and it is very apparent that this relationship had an actual effect on his writing. The topic of being with someone, making the love, being in a relationship, marriage, it suddenly becomes apparent in his stories. This was never featured in the stories before, but now suddenly hybrid offspring caused by mating between humans and monsters are a recurring theme. Women also now show up in the stories too, something that was almost not seen before. You know, for of this you can look at the Curse of Yig, the Shadow Over Innsmouth, which we're talking about, the Dunwich Horror, the Thing on the Doorstep. The Thing on the Doorstep, at least in my opinion, it's such an amazing story and it's so overlooked. I want to do a deep dive on it. It's actually connected to the Innsmouth story. So if this channel keeps growing, then we might get there. Not only Color Out of Space and Mountains of Madness, but also the Thing on the Doorstep and other cool shit. And now the final tidbit, I'm saving the big one for the end. This is something that is really dark. I haven't seen it anywhere else. It's just like my analysis of the Dunwich Horror with Lovecraft's relationship to his mother. I'll give you a bit of a background first, for those of you who don't know. So Lovecraft's parents, Winfield Scott Lovecraft and Sarah Susan Phillips, they both died in a mental hospital. Winfield, the father, was a traveling salesman and he had gotten syphilis on one of his travels. If you don't know, syphilis is a disease that is transmitted during the boinking. It's one of those diseases, and it actually has several stages. The final stage of syphilis is more or less summarized by breakdown of the brain, or several brain functions. People actually go insane. Nietzsche, for example, had it. And it was like that with Winfield. He started having hallucination when Lovecraft was a very small child. The father was then sent to a hospital, and he never got out. He would die years later. Lovecraft was lied to actually. He was actually told that his father was in a comatose state for all these years. I'm pretty sure that at some point later he must have found out about it all. Now, I don't know if his mother also had contracted syphilis from her husband, which would make sense. But she would then later on have a similar fate. She would have a breakdown, she would go to the mental health hospital, and she would never recover. She would just die there. Madness and the cursed blood are such a typical Lovecraftian topic. It's in so many stories. Heck, even sanity and insanity mechanics are the reason why the role-playing game by Chaosium, called Call of Cthulhu, is such a banger. Another thing that's important for what's gonna come is that Lovecraft, at least on the outside, he revered his mother. He said that, she can't do wrong, she's a marvel. But she, on the other hand, she really didn't treat him well, and she said some horrible stuff about her little boy. She was a mix of overbearing mother, she would always find new diseases in her son to keep him at home. He was actually homeschooled. And then she was actually stating out in the open, in front of her friends, how disgusting Lovecraft is, that he needs to hide his body, that he shouldn't be out in the streets, people shouldn't have to look at him. I don't know if this was a projection, because she was actually hating his dad, because Lovecraft's father did that to the family. We don't know, but I think it would make sense. So in some way, Lovecraft's father, maybe idolized by HP, married his wife, who would then give birth to Lovecraft and who would torture Lovecraft psychologically as a child. And in some other way, Lovecraft's mother, definitely idolized in some ways by him, married the father who would bring insanity and other dark things into Lovecraft's life. And in the middle of all of this, Lovecraft grows up. And the stories I mentioned before, especially Shadow Over Innsmouth and The Thing on the Doorstep, they feature heavily this motif of a man or a woman marrying somebody who turns out to be a rotten apple, to be a monster. Robert Olmsted, the protagonist of Shadow Over Innsmouth, he finds terrible truths in his family tree. His ancestors had to marry and mate disgusting fish people, or they would find out later that their spouse was actually an undying monster hybrid, that their child was inevitably spoiled or besmirched. Some of the children even end their lives when they find this out. So, what I'm thinking, is this all about processing how you are married to a monster? Is this about how Lovecraft had to grow up witnessing that his mother married his dad who had syphilis from having out-of-wedlock affairs from his journeys, just like Old Man Marsh brought in disease and madness from his journey? Is this about Lovecraft's father having a child with a woman who would turn so much against that child, who would turn out to be such a monster, and how out of all of that spawns something horrible that needs to be hated, needs to be called ugly, something very different and undying, something horrible that is maybe even Lovecraft himself whose literature has immortalized him in horror forever, but he would be such an outcast who would be so different than everybody else. What do you think? Thank you all so much for watching. Buy the shirts. Goodbye.